Good evening. MA Philosophy MPYE-002, block number 2, unit number 2, Human Virtues, Objectives. The theory of morality, which makes virtues the central concern, is called virtue ethics. We shall explore the chief ideas of virtue ethics, especially in the philosophy of the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle and the contemporary Western philosopher McIntyre. We shall also engage in discussion with regard to virtues from the point of the view of the Asian religious traditions, notably Confucians, Buddhism, and Taoism. In this unit, we seek to specify some major criticism against virtues ethics. Introduction. Among the major currents that now dominate moral philosophy, virtue ethics counterbalances the influence of Kantianism, while the Kantian ethics attempts to relativize the ethical importance of happiness. Virtue ethics rejects the Enlightenment project that found morality on reason and brings to the forefront the question of happiness and that of nature. By what logic is this shift made possible, and how does it reconcile altruism inherent in Kant's ethics of duty with more personal research for our own happiness? In the legacy of Kant, one cannot define morality from within the framework of happiness, because that would make desire to be the foundation of the moral will, and desire by definition varies from individual to individual. If everyone is in search of one's own happiness, the very content of one's happiness is strictly personal. This would sacrifice any attempt to conceive a universal moral law. In order to prevent moral conscience from relativism in the pursuit of goals, Kant opposed the pursuit of happiness by consciousness of duty enabled through the categorical imperative as a universal obligation. Yet in recent decades, we are witnessing in ethics a resurgence of the need for happiness, not as the maximizing of pleasure as in the case of uni, utilitarianism, but as as the perfection of one's own existence. The idea through reinstated by some contemporary writers such as uh, Alasdair McIntyre after virtue, or the Elizabeth Anscombe. The modern moral philosophy is as old as the Greek thinkers like Aristotle. Virtue, in the Aristotelian sense of the term, is the form of excellence in the realization of one's being. Thus, virtue ethics, as one of the major approaches in normative ethics, is in contrast both to the approach which emphasizes duties, deontology, and to that which emphasizes the consequences of actions. Consequentialism. Suppose someone in need should be helped, and utilitarian will point to the fact that the consequences of doing so will maximize one's well-being. A deontologist will emphasize the fact that in doing so the agent will be acting in accordance with a moral rule, such as do unto others as you would like others do to you. And a virtue ethicist will underscore that helping that person would be benevolent and therefore virtuous. Aristotle and his concept of e- eudaimonia. Aristotle is one of the founders of the virtue ethics in Greece. He says that the human person is a rational animal. Human person has got the ability to reason out, which serves as the essential characteristics and functions of the human being. This essential characteristic of being rational leads to achieve a particular goal or end, which Aristotle calls virtue. This position is called as the teleological position. Action-oriented life is based on an assumptions. What you do what do you want to do? But virtuous life presupposes the question, what do you want to be, or what kind of person you are aspiring to be. For example, a good carpenter aims at the virtue that is a good sense of aesthetics. Eudaimonia is an Aristotelian term loosely and inadequately translated as happiness. It is not what we think of in an ordinary way. Eudaimonia means the flourishing of human life. Aristotle recognizes that actions are not pointless because they have a purpose. Every action aims at some good. For example, the doctor's vaccination of the baby aims at the baby's health. Furthermore, some actions are done for their own sake, ends in themselves, and some other actions are done for the sake of some others and means to other ends. Aristotle claims that all actions that are ends in themselves also contribute to a wider end, and that is the greater good of all. That good is eudaimonia. In the other word, eudaimonia is happiness, contentment, and fulfillment. It is the name of the best kind of life, which is an end in itself and a means to live and fare well. In this opinion, virtuous thinking of human being leads to a good action that further cultivates good habits. These habits develop virtuous character that lead to the final goal, that is eudaimonia, happiness. Virtues are of two types. They are intellectual virtues and moral virtues. Intellectual virtues are that which can be taught and learned. Prudence is one such virtue. We can easily learn from others as to how to be prudent. Moral virtues can be achieved by repeatedly doing an action that becomes a habit. These cultivated habits lead to achieve the ultimate happiness. Aristotle also says that virtue is a golden mean, that which lies in the middle of the two extremes. For example, courage as a moral virtue lies between the two extremes, namely cowardice and hardiness. Four important virtues, according to Aristotle, are wisdom, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. Courage. All virtue ethicists all virtue ethicists are indebted to Aristotle in some way. Almost all of them give importance to the character of a person rather than compliance with certain norms of right behavior. This does not mean that they ignore moral obligations. Rather, they affirm the primacy of virtues because according to them moral obligations can only be derived from virtues. Hence the virtue ethicists do not primarily concern themselves with questions like if lying is wrong. They would rather seek to address if lying in a particular situation is detrimental to the honesty of the person. It becomes clear then that the virtue ethicists consider that mere adherence to moral precepts does not satisfactorily respond to challenges in leading a moral life. A full blown ethics should take into account many factors such as motives and intentions, which are largely neglected by the duty based ethics. Kant's duty for duty's sake offers no place for motives. In other words, we do not act out of loyalty or honesty. It may be the duty of a son to take care of his ailing mother, but if he does without being motivated by love, his moral life seems incomplete. Hence, moral virtues alone can ensure human flourishing. Virtues and actions. How virtues are related to actions? Are they related to all? How does an adherent of virtue ethics judge his her own actions and those of others to be right or wrong? If someone tells a lie to avoid paying a debt, an adherent of virtue ethics, instead of taking recourse to the moral norm, do not lie, would judge the action of lying as wrong based on the virtue of honesty. For lying lacks the virtue of honesty, and honesty for a virtue ethicist is integral to human flourishing. The virtue ethicists have been cultivating the virtue of honest over the years, not only in the case of lying but also in other actions. Thus, acting honestly in is part of his her very person, and his her actions reflect his her virtuous character. In other words, his her actions naturally flow from what kind of person he is rather than from adhering to specific moral norms. Virtue ethicists develop virtue not only because it leads them to happiness, but also it enables human flourishing in general. Hence, they evaluate their actions not only in the light of results they produce from them, but also for others. Similarly, they judge not only actions but also those of others to see if those actions lead to human flourishing. Thus, the guidance they seek in living out a moral life is not so much from the clearly laid out norms as from virtues that promote human flourishing. Not moral norms, but persons who lead virtuous life become moral ideal. As the philosopher Louis Postman says, they look for moral ideals in persons without focusing on abstract reasons. Evaluating virtue ethics. As we have noted earlier, virtue ethics offers a better motive for the action one does than the duty based ethics. Saving a life of someone only out of the sense of duty seems to lack a better motivation like compassion and kindness, which can be expected only from a person who has developed these virtues in him her. It is also important to note that duty based ethics somehow neglects some of the essential aspect of moral life, namely the emphasis of being a good person leading a virtuous life. While there are such positive aspects in virtue ethics which is not accounted by duty ethics, there are also some limitations in virtue ethics. The critics of virtue ethics specify at least three difficulties with regard to this ethical approach. First of all, they lack moral principles, and ethics without a specific principle cannot guide us in deciding the moral choice of an action. For example, when someone steals money, what would be a morally right act in dealing with that person? Virtue ethics at best can tell us that we have to follow the model of virtuous persons. It does not specify or give guiding principle as to what persons would do exactly in that situation. The problem with virtue ethics, as is pointed by many philosophers, is that it presents its argument in a circular way. The action, if a virtuous person is right, and the right action is the one done by virtuous person. If we need to avoid this circularity, we need other guiding principles which go beyond virtue ethics. Secondly, there is a lack of moral judgment in virtue ethics. A person may be virtuous, but she may still not be able to distinguish right action from wrong action, especially if she is not knowledgeable in a particular field. For example, a virtuous person who is a neophyte as far as scientific developments are concerned will not be able to say if stem cell research can be permitted or forbidden. In other words, the rightness or wrongness of an action does not fully depend on the virtuous character of a person. There are moral standards that are independent of the character of a person to judge the moral rightness and wrongness of an action. Thirdly, there can be situations in which virtues enter into conflict with one another. For example, if a person comes across a dilemma situation of his or friend brought to trial, and she is a witness, if the person tells the truth, which means she is a dishonest, his her friends will end up in prison for a few years. If the person wants to save his her friend to show loyalty to his her friendship, he she will necessarily tell lie which implies that she is dishonest. Which of these two virtues, honesty and loyalty, is to be pursued in this situation? Virtue ethics does not seem to provide us a satisfactory answer. This is true for all such dilemma situations. What does virtue ethics have to say about dilemmas, cases in which different virtues conflict? Justice prompt us to kill the person who is a reckless murderer, but love forbids it. Honestly demands that truth be told, even if hurts, while compassion might suggest lying. What shall we do? Of course, the same kind of dilemmas are generated by conflicts between the rules of the duty-based ethics. Uh, Deontology and virtue ethics share the conflict problem. The proponents of the duty-based ethics suggest that such conflicts between norms of duty can be resolved by determining the prominence of one norm over another. This, however, does not seem to be possible in virtue ethics unless otherwise there are other guiding principles to ascertain as to which virtues are more important than other virtues. Deontology versus virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, deontology versus virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is concerned with being rather than doing. It is agent centered rather than act centered. Critics maintain that it was unable to provide action guidance and hence rather than being a normative rival to utilitarian and deontological ethics, it could claim to be no more than a valuable supplement to them. Immanuel Kant, in his duty-based ethics, emphasizes on doing the duty for the sake of duty, which is also the stand of all other deontologists in general. For example, if a wife falls sick, it is obviously the duty of her husband to take care of her. Duty-based ethics does not give any motivation other than duty. Virtue ethics offers Virtue ethics offer us virtues like loyalty, compassion, love, and the like as motivations to do one's duty in an effective way. Good virtues motivate us to do our duties. Sometimes this duty-based ethics goes against common sense. For example, during the wartime, thousands and thousands of innocent like thousands and thousands of innocents like women and children are brutally killed by the army. But army men follow the duty-based ethics, so they simply kill the innocent in order to execute their plan, that which is part of duty as army men. Virtue ethics, however, has inspired many thinkers to give the right place to principles without making them absolute. As William Frankena notes rightly, principles without traits, virtues are impotent, and traits without principles are blind. Ethics of care is a very powerful and influential version of virtue ethics, though some might consider it to be an independent moral theory in its own right, developed mainly by feminist thinkers like the woman psychologist Carnol Gilligan. This account of virtue ethics dwells chiefly on the different ways in which men and women think of moral problems. According to Gilligan, men make moral decisions on the basis of rights and justice, while women make moral decisions on the basis of caring and feeling of others and their viewpoint. According the approach According the approach of men towards moral issues can be termed ethics of justice, while that of women can be called ethics of care. Thus, the ethics of care emphasizes close personal relationship and moral virtues such as compassion and sympathy. It calls for a change in our perception of morality and of virtues, laying greater emphasis on virtues exemplified by women such as taking care of others, patience, and the ability to nurture, self-sacrifice, etc. It is not clear if we can maintain that women and men adopt different approaches to virtues. We that as it may, there must be place for care in virtue ethics along with other virtues such as justice and honesty. May Entire relativity of virtues in the contemporary era alas there McIntyre is a major figure in the recent revival of interest in virtue ethics and also the ethics of care, which gives innocence to the body with regard to the conduct of human beings. In this dependent rational animals, why human beings need the virtues. He affirms that morality cannot be thought outside of biology in so far as human person is an embodied being and not just pure rational mind as is presented within the framework of dualistic philosophy. He says that virtues change according to the context. In the period of Homer, physical strength was considered to be the virtue. In the period of Athens, Socrates, and Aristotle, moral integrity was considered as a virtue. Whereas during the Middle Ages, when Christianity thrives, spiritual strength was considered to be the virtue. McIntyre took a relativist stand that virtues are relative. That is to say that the uh, virtues differ in different contexts. He concludes that these differences can be attributed to different practices that generate different conception of virtues. Each account of virtue Each account of virtue require a prior account of social and moral feature in order to be understood. Thus, in order to understand ho- Homeric virtue, we need to look its social role in Greek society. Virtues then are exercised within practices and social forms of activity that are coherent and seek to realize goods internal to the activity. Virtues enable us to achieve these goals. There is an end telos uh, that transcends our particular practices, and it constitutes the good of a whole human life. Thus, McIntyre approach to ethics is more in terms of understanding moral decisions than funding and than finding an absolute rule for choosing how to behave in any similar case. It is relativistic in terms of morality and believe it's useless to try to determine absolute rule of conduct either through Kantian categorical imperative or utilitarian calculus of utility maximizing and welfare. Virtues in Asian regions, Confucianism, while Aristotle emphasizes nurturing virtues through habitual ways of behavior by individual. Confucius holds that the humanness, Jen or Ren, Jen or Ren, which can also be translated as kind-heartedness or benevolence, is derived from the web of social relationship. Hence, leading a virtuous life does not consist so much in living accordance to one's inner nature as was thought by Aristotle, but meeting the requirement of relationship in which we find ourselves. We are not isolated individuals but part of the social network. Hence, the most basic of all virtues is humanness. All other virtues such as righteousness and faithfulness flow naturally from humanness. For example, in the relationship of citizen and ruler, the prime virtue is righteousness, and in friendship, it is faithfulness. Be it righteousness and faithfulness, all virtues are associated to the greatest virtue of humanity, that is humanness. Thus, Confucius brings in the social character of human person, which allows for a harmonious society. Buddhism, both Aristotle and Confucius give importance to the human person, be it individually or collectively. In their frame of virtue ethics, Buddhism adopts completely a different approach. For the concept of self as a substance does not fall in line with the main teachings of Buddhism. Human is made up of five skandhas which are not changing. There is no permanent self. The imagined entity called self only leads to desire and attachment, which in turn further lead to suffering. So, virtues are neither self actualizing as in the case of Aristotle nor society centered as in the case of Confucius. Instead, it consists in freeing oneself and others from suffering. If desire is the cause of suffering, then the virtues that would free us from suffering would be tranquility and non-attachment. In order to arrive at these virtues, we should be truthful both in thought and speech. Taoism takes its inspiration from Buddhism with regard to the idea of flux and non-permanence. To be virtuous would then mean that going with the flow, just like water water in a stream. Analogy given by Tao Te Ching: the flow of water is not an image of the weak, but of the strong, because its flow cannot be resisted. A true Taoist must let him her go along the currents, taking control of one's senses, body and mind. This is possible only through selfless, spontaneous, simple, and serene life. Let us sum up. The basic contention of virtue ethics is that moral actions are derived from virtues. Aristotle, the main proponent of virtue ethics from the Western tradition, hold that the greatest good of human life is eudaimonia, human flourishing, and to achieve this, we should cultivate virtues, and a virtue is a golden mean between two extremes. The resurgence of virtue ethics is the contemporary era through eminent thinkers like Michael McIntyre points out to the lack in duty-based ethics, thus insisting that ethics involve not merely actions impelled by duty, but also motives and intentions. While Aristotle's virtue ethics rest on human individual, virtue ethics as developed by some Asian regions emphasize social relationship and non-attachment. Whatever to be pitfall of virtue ethics, it remains relevant and forms part of ethical theories. Eudaimonia, term introduced by Aristotle that is translated as happiness. The term means to flourish in is the aim of human person. Deontology, a school of thought which holds on to the view that rules norms are more important than values. Teleology, the theory that events and developments are meant to achieve a purpose and happen because of that. Telos means end. Thank you.